A rough-looking young man shoved an elderly woman on a crowded subway. The train car was packed, but no one said a word, until a quiet figure in a cowboy hat rose and everything began to change. But before we step into that moment, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if this story speaks to you, consider subscribing. The subway growled as it pulled away from the platform, its wheels shrieking like metal tearing at metal. It was Monday, just after 8 a.m., and the car was full to the brim. Commuters stood tightly packed, heads down, eyes glued to their phones or lost in thought. The air was thick with the scent of bitter coffee, damp wool, and that cold, metallic underground odor. Near the doors stood an older woman, silver hair neatly pinned, her beige coat fastened up to her neck, a canvas tote held firmly to her chest. She stood quietly, respectfully, taking up little space. Across from her, lounging with a swagger, sat a young man likely in his early 20s. His cap was turned backward, hoodie sagging around his shoulders, his gaze locked on the glowing screen of his phone. His leg bounced to the rhythm of music that only he could hear. Beside him, the seat remained empty. With a gentle smile, the woman leaned slightly and spoke in a soft tone. "Would it be all right if I sat here?" The man didn't glance up. "Too slow, lady. Gotta get your spot before the train fills." He stretched out even more, taking up both seats. A man nearby adjusted his glasses, noticing the exchange, then quickly looked away. The rest of the car stayed silent. The woman said nothing further. She remained standing, swaying with the train's motion, clutching her tote a little tighter. Inside it were 2 apples, a loaf of bread, and a small jar of strawberry jam. She had risen with the sun, as she did every Monday since she'd left her job, heading early to the market. As the train curved sharply, it jolted, making the lights flicker briefly overhead. She steadied herself by gripping the nearby pole, her shoulder brushing lightly against the young man. He recoiled dramatically. "Watch it, Grandma," he snapped. Eyes turned momentarily from screens, but no one intervened. The woman's cheeks flushed, yet she offered no reply. She shifted slightly away, creating distance. Her fingers gripped the tote more firmly. The man leaned forward, raising his voice. "Can you believe this? Can't even sit in peace without someone crowding you." He looked around for support. None came. A school-aged girl in a navy uniform stood nearby, phone in hand, her thumb hovering near the record button, but she didn't press it. Then the man reached over and tapped the tote. "What's in there, Nana? Something good?" He gave the strap a quick flick, laughing. The woman softly shook her head. "Please don't," she said in a whisper. But he ignored her. With a mocking grin, he grabbed the bottom of the tote and gave it a small lift. One apple dropped, then the other, rolling across the grimy floor. The jam jar tilted but stayed intact. She let out a quiet gasp and knelt to gather the fruit, balancing herself carefully. That's when it happened. A quick motion, sharp, intentional. His elbow snapped backward, catching her square beneath the collarbone. Not a strike exactly, but violent enough. She staggered, landing against the hard edge of the subway door. A muted thud rang out. The noise wasn't loud, but the silence that followed was jarring. A young boy in a puffer jacket opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. An older woman raised a scarf to her lips. The schoolgirl took one hesitant step forward, then stopped herself. No one said a word. The man leaned back, smug. "Here's your morning lesson," he said, loud enough for the car to hear. "Don't lean on strangers." Still, silence. But further down the car, behind the crowd, past steel bars and winter coats, a man slowly raised his head. He had stood the entire ride, one gloved hand gripping the bar above, his stance steady, boots set wide apart. A seasoned cowboy stood beneath the brim of his hat, its wide shadow hiding the quiet intensity in his eyes. The lines on his leather coat were etched deep by years of sun and wear, just like the creases around his mouth. His beard matched the woman's in silver and age. His gaze held steady, watching. The train had begun slipping into the next tunnel, steel grinding against steel, a metallic hum rising like a second pulse in the belly of the car. The woman, moving slowly, lowered herself to the floor. Her joints creaked in protest as she stretched toward the apples that had escaped her bag and now rolled beneath the seats. Her fingers quivered with age, uncertain. One apple had landed near the feet of a young brute slouched in front of her. He made no move to help. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on knees, and smirked. "Seriously? You're gonna crawl for some fruit?" She didn't respond. Her arm extended, shaking slightly, toward the final apple, which had come to rest just beside the toe of his boot. He lifted his foot and slammed it down, crushing the apple with a dull crunch. Its juice smeared across the dirty floor like a wound left open. The crowd recoiled. The woman looked up, locking eyes with him. He arched a brow, head cocked like he'd just squashed an insect. "That it?" he asked, almost playfully. She gave no reply. Her hand trembled as she reached for a second apple she'd placed in a small jam jar, scratched but still whole. The lights flickered overhead, uncertain and tired. At the far end of the train, the cowboy started walking. No rush, no fanfare. Just steady, deliberate steps. He passed a mother holding her child tighter, a student clenching his backpack, a woman frozen mid-text. The punk hadn't noticed him yet, too caught up in his show. Turning to the rest of the car, he raised his voice. "See, this is what happens when folks think they're owed something. Respect, a seat, just 'cause they're old or weak or whatever. Nobody owes nobody anything." His words bounced in the silence. A teenager lowered his phone, eyes fixed on the floor. The old woman slowly rose, her hand gripping the metal pole for balance. Her shoulders weren't bowed from age, but from the weight of humiliation. Then a voice cut through the air. Calm, even, sharper than any blade. "Pick it up." The thug blinked, thrown off, and turned. Just 2 feet behind him stood Sylvester Stallone. Closer now, close enough that the air itself seemed to quiet. The leather of his jacket creaked as he shifted. "What?" the punk barked. Stallone didn't blink. "The apple. Pick it up, and apologize." The car stirred like something waking. A woman stepped back. A camera clicked on. The punk let out a shaky laugh, then louder, more forced. "You serious, old man? Who are you, huh? Her bodyguard? Her grandpa?" He turned to the crowd, waving one hand. "What is this, some cowboy movie?" Stallone took another step. That was all. The punk rose now, lifting his chin to keep his edge. "What's your deal?" he challenged. Stallone's voice rumbled low, like a slow avalanche. "You hurt her. You fix it." No bark, no threat. Just truth, heavy as the rails underfoot. The thug looked around, expecting support. But eyes met his now. No one looked away. He shifted, uneasy. "You need to step back, man. I'm serious." Stallone tilted his head slightly. "I already did." The moment held, thick, charged. Then a sharp voice broke it. "Yo, you need backup?" A younger man stood 2 rows down, broader, jacket zipped high, earbuds out now. Another one, clearly a friend. The first thug grinned wider. "See? You sure about this now?" Stallone slowly turned, eyes passing over the second man, then back again. The woman behind him clutched her purse tighter. This wasn't about apples anymore. It wasn't about respect. It had become something else. A line had been drawn, and Sylvester Stallone had stepped over it. The second young man squared his stance, shoulders high like a dog pretending to be bigger. He took a step forward, jabbing his thumb at his chest. "You got beef, cowboy? 'Cause I don't bow to anybody." Stallone didn't answer. He just stood there, shadow cast by the brim of his hat, eyes weathered by things these boys couldn't begin to imagine. The train gave a gentle jolt as it shifted tracks, a subtle motion that didn't so much as stir Sylvester Stallone. He remained still, statuesque. His hands hung easily at his sides, boots steady on the floor like they'd been welded there. Across the aisle, phones emerged, first a few, then many, but the mood was solemn. Not a chuckle, not even a whisper. Just eyes, watchful, uncertain of what they were witnessing. From the left, a second figure began to move forward. He was broader, with a fuller face, his posture laced with aggression. "You looking to get put down, old man? We don't care who you think you are." Still, Stallone stayed quiet. The thug already in front waved a dismissive hand close to his face. "What's the matter, can't hear? You lost or something? First time riding a train?" No flinch, no expression. Stallone slowly turned to check on his wife. She was near the door, clutching her bag tightly, complexion pale. But her eyes, they were fixed on his back, filled with unwavering trust. He turned his gaze back to the man blocking his way, looked him square in the eyes. Then came the words, soft, unhurried, certain. "This is your last chance." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a performance. It was said the way someone might mention that the tide was rising or dusk was near. The first thug snorted. "Last chance for what? To pick up my groceries? Get lost, man." He pushed Stallone with an open palm, a shove more meant to provoke than to harm. Stallone yielded by barely half an inch, not out of weakness, but like a tree sways with the breeze. And that's when the feeling in the air changed. No gasps, no shouts, just a deepening quiet, the kind that settles before a storm. The man pushed again, harder this time. "Don't do this, old man. You don't know what you're getting into." Stallone glanced back at his wife. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She gave a small nod. "A little." He turned back. His expression shifted. What had been calm and open now took on a different edge. Not fury, not hate, precision. He took a single step forward. The thug reacted with another shove, but this time, Stallone's hand rose and caught the man's wrist mid-motion. There was no force, no drama, just control. The thug's arm stopped as if it had met iron. He blinked, pulled, but it was as if the limb was stuck in place. Stallone's grip wasn't crushing. It didn't have to be. It simply was. Stallone tilted his head ever so slightly. "I gave you a warning." Behind him, the second thug fidgeted, his confidence waning. His eyes drifted to a third man down the car, still seated. That one hadn't made a move. He was watching, uncertain, eyes bouncing between phone screens and the scene unfolding. The tension in the train car had shifted completely. It was no longer spectacle. It was reckoning. Silent, steady, unrelenting. The first thug finally wrenched his arm away, stepping back in frustration. "Man, you're nuts. Just walk away. You ain't worth the trouble." But Stallone stayed right where he was. No pose, no glares, just presence. The silence deepened, the kind that makes every sound feel swallowed. One by one, the phones lowered, not because the moment had passed, but because it demanded respect. A hushed voice murmured, "He hasn't even touched anybody." The first thug looked at his partner. "We should go." But the moment had already passed them. A line had been crossed, and nothing would be the same. And Stallone? He hadn't budged, because this wasn't the climax where punches flew. It was the still point, the choice, the reckoning that would echo long after. The silence had turned dense, electric. The very air felt charged. Every tremor of the train felt exaggerated, like the whole machine was holding back a breath. The thug gave a nervous laugh, shaking his head like he could brush off the tension. "You're all acting like this guy's some kind of legend," he said, turning toward Sylvester Stallone with a smirk. "What now, Rambo? You gonna whip out a revolver from that coat?" Stallone remained still. The young man half turned to the onlookers again, his arms spread wide like a second-rate magician. "I mean, seriously, take a good look. What's he gonna do? Give me a bedtime story? Maybe a little speech about morals and hard work?" His voice grew louder, desperate to reclaim the authority he felt slipping. You honestly think I'm gonna stoop down and grab a grocery bag because some guy wearing secondhand boots asked me real nice? Still, not a word from Stallone. He merely shifted, barely. Those paying attention saw it. A quiet recalibration, his stance a touch wider, his arms looser at his sides. That slight composed movement carried more weight than a shouted threat, and it rattled the thug in a way he hadn't expected. His grin began to fade, his voice losing tempo. You don't even have a badge. You're no cop. You're nothing. Stallone tilted his head slowly. I'm her husband. Just 3 words, soft and low, yet they landed with a finality that stunned the entire car. The thug blinked, unsure. So what? He muttered. Stallone stepped in, closing the space between them to just inches. You heard her, he said, his voice even. Pick up her bag. The thug laughed again, but the sound was hollow, breaking midway like dry timber. Man, I don't do handouts. This isn't a handout, Stallone replied, his voice calm and steady. It's the last kind request you'll hear today. From the far end of the train car, the second thug pushed forward, sensing that things were tipping toward something irreversible. His tone cut sharper than before. You think we're afraid of you? We own this city, he snapped. You're just a pit stop. Stallone finally turned to look at him, locking eyes without flinching. I've walked through worse. A shiver ran through a few passengers, not from the words themselves, but the way he said them, like they were carved in stone. The second thug hesitated, then halted. Attention shifted back to the first. Stallone didn't advance. He just waited. And in that quiet, every second felt heavier. The first thug's bluster began to crumble. You know what? Fine, he said, bluffing now. He crouched down, picked up the battered bag like it was contaminated, and held it out toward Stallone's wife, who'd remained silent at the back of the train. But just before she could take it, he let go. On purpose. Groceries spilled, apples rolled. The glass jar of jam hit the floor and cracked open with a sickening pop. Oh no, he said with mock surprise. Clumsy me. A collective inhale swept through the car. Stallone stared at the broken jar, strawberry preserves smeared across the metal floor like blood. One lone apple rolled until it came to rest against his boot. He looked up again. The thug smirked, puffed up. Oops. Stallone's expression didn't change. Then, in a voice almost gentle, he asked, Do you have a mother? The thug frowned. What? A sister? What's that got to do with anything? Stallone leaned in, his voice low and burning. Then you should understand. He paused. This is where it ends. Another shiver passed through the train. The thug tried to maintain his footing, but his stance betrayed him. Something in him wavered. The cockiness gave way to uncertainty, and then, barely, fear. Someone whispered from the seats, He means it. Still, no fists, no yelling. But every soul in that car knew. The moment had come. Not rage, not revenge, just inevitability. The train swayed gently, its wheels clacking like a slow countdown. No one cared about the tunnel anymore. Every eye was on the man in the dusty coat. The thug stood frozen, caught between a bruised ego and the creeping dread of something he couldn't name. The man before him, the one with the battered boots and quiet presence, had done nothing more than speak, and yet he was winning. And that made the thug furious. He stepped in again, chest puffed, fists clenched. You think you can scare me with some cowboy grandpa act? No response. You think this is a movie? Silence. He shoved Stallone, hard. Stallone didn't flinch, didn't even sway. Sylvester slowly turned his head, just enough to glimpse his wife beside him, still clutching the torn fabric of her grocery tote, her fingers barely steady. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. A little, she murmured. Sylvester looked ahead again, His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The thug caught it, but too late. "This is your last chance," Sylvester said. The words weren't loud, but they carried. Everyone nearby heard them, including the man. Instead of stepping back, the thug did what people like him always do when they start to lose their grip. He lashed out, both hands this time shoving hard. Sylvester gave a single step back, not from the impact, but from choice. A second man stepped into the mix, circling in from the side. "You think you're gonna stroll out of here with that look on your face?" he sneered. "Nah, old man, lesson time," he added with a mocking grin. Sylvester shifted his stance. His arms stayed down, loose. The first thug lunged, reaching for Sylvester's shoulder, maybe to strike, maybe to shove. He never made it. Sylvester moved just slightly. His weight dropped, just a little. He angled left and in. His right hand met the man's wrist, not yanking, not forcing, just guiding. The thug's own momentum betrayed him. He stumbled forward, off balance, and Sylvester let him fall. The man slammed against the subway wall with a groan, his knee giving as he slid down. Shock rippled through the train. The second attacker cursed and charged. Sylvester moved without pause. His left arm came up like a snap of instinct, throwing the incoming blow off target. At the same time, his right leg slid behind the man's ankle. With a clean turn of the hip, he shifted the thug's weight and brought him down flat against the train floor. The sound echoed, sharp and final. The car erupted, shouts, gasps, phones rising into the air again. But Sylvester said nothing. He simply turned to look at the first man, now frozen in place, eyes wide. "You should have walked away," Sylvester said. The thug opened his mouth, but no words came. Sylvester stepped toward him. The man retreated a pace, then another, until his back struck the sealed subway door. He glanced left, right, no exit. Sylvester didn't press. Instead, he slowly bent and gathered what was left of their groceries. A bruised apple, a shattered jar, the limp, torn bag. He brought them over to his wife. Her hand trembled as she accepted them, but her nod wasn't from fear. It came from understanding. Sylvester turned again, casting one last look at the man by the doors. His meaning was unmistakable. "That was your final chance, and you wasted it." For a beat, it felt like the moment had ended. The first thug remained pinned to the door, hands raised, not in surrender, but confusion. The second lay groaning. The third had made no move at all, suddenly studying the linoleum like it held secrets. Sylvester stood still at the center of the car, one arm gently around his wife, the other hanging loose. His breath was even, shoulders at ease. The threat, for all appearances, was gone. But there's always one more. From the dim end of the car, where the flickering lights made everything feel a little uncertain, a fourth man rose. No one had seen him before. Hood up, hands deep in his coat, his posture quiet. Watching. Waiting. He didn't strut. He didn't speak. He simply moved, deliberately. People near him leaned away. A woman whispered, "Who is that?" No one had time to answer. As Sylvester turned slightly to check on his wife, the man advanced. In his hand, a short baton, polymer, reinforced, heavy at the core, the kind you'd see on a cop's belt, but modified. He held it low, then swung. The arc was smooth, fast. The baton cracked against Sylvester's skull just above the ear. The noise wasn't sharp. It was dull, heavy, the awful sound of something solid hitting flesh. His knees gave out. His right shoulder hit the pole next to him. His body folded, dropped hard to the floor. His head bounced slightly off the metal. His wife screamed. Others yelled. A phone slipped from someone's hand. In a heartbeat, the car was chaos. The man with the baton stood over Sylvester, chest heaving. His face was blank, untouched by emotion, as if this were routine. He didn't speak. Sylvester didn't move. For the first time, the car saw him still. One hand gave a small twitch. maybe involuntary. Then, nothing. The man with the baton stepped back, breathing slow through his nose. He wiped sweat from his brow and scanned the crowd, like he was saying, "See? That's all it took." A man's voice muttered, "Did he kill him?" Another answered, voice shaking, "No, he's breathing." The thug who had earlier dropped the groceries blinked, his confidence crumbling. "Told you he was just putting on a show," he muttered, though his voice now trembled. The first man still sat slouched against the subway door. Sylvester Stallone's wife dropped to her knees beside him, both hands pressing against his chest. "Sylvester, Sylvester, look at me." Nothing. Her voice faltered. "Please." Then a breath, faint but unmistakable. His eyes fluttered open, not wide, but enough. Enough to know he was still with her, still fighting. One blink, then another. His fingers curled against the grimy subway floor. The thug raised the baton again. "Don't," she said, standing swiftly. Her voice lacked volume, but every word landed like steel. The man stopped, smirked. "Stay out of this, lady." He took a step forward. That's when Sylvester's leg twitched. Barely, but it mattered. He planted an elbow behind him. His opposite hand grabbed the nearby pole. Slowly, steadily, he began to rise. Like a man who'd taken hits before and learned the rhythm of getting back up. The thug hesitated. Blood now streaked from Sylvester's right temple, trickling down into the collar of his coat. His jaw locked. His frame wobbled, then steadied. His eyes found the thug's, and whatever the thug saw staring back made the baton feel heavier in his grip. Sylvester didn't speak, but his stance spoke loud enough. "It's my move now." The entire subway car seemed to shift, not into chaos, but into something electric, alive. He stood fully, blood still flowing, one hand gripping the pole for support. His knuckles, bruised from the fall, curled just enough. No trembling, no faltering, just breath. In, out, measured. The thug blinked, unsure if he should press or retreat. But before he could decide, Sylvester moved. Not quick, not dramatic, just efficient. He closed the distance between them, too close for the baton to be useful. The thug swung anyway. The weapon arced toward Sylvester's shoulder, but he stepped inside the strike zone. His left hand shot up, catching the wrist mid-swing, halting the blow. He twisted his hips, grabbed the man's elbow, and rotated. The baton clattered to the floor. A soft gasp spread through the car. The thug tried pulling away, but Sylvester advanced, pressing a firm hand against the thug's chest and shoving, not violently, but precisely. The man stumbled backward and slammed into a support pole, his head snapping back as he dropped to one knee. Not unconscious, but winded and stunned. Sylvester didn't follow. He turned calmly, blood still dripping from his brow, and stared at the first man, the one who had shoved his wife. Their eyes locked. The younger man froze. Sylvester stepped forward once. That was enough. Panic overtook the thug. He bolted for the other end of the car, but the doors were still sealed, darkness stretching out beyond the windows. He banged on the emergency panel, shouting, "Open! Open!" Sylvester didn't run. He walked, steady, certain, like he had all day. The thug fumbled at the controls, then spun around and threw a desperate punch. It missed. Sylvester leaned just enough, letting the strike glance past. Then he looped his arm around the thug's elbow and yanked, turning the man's own momentum against him. A crack split the air. The thug screamed, collapsing and clutching his arm. Sylvester stepped back, not to grandstand, just to breathe. 2 down. The heavy-set thug, the one who'd been barking earlier, finally charged. He let out a guttural shout and barreled forward like a linebacker, arms wide. Sylvester waited, then sidestepped. The man blew past him, stumbled over his fallen comrade, and smacked chest first into a bench. The sound that escaped him was more wheeze than roar. Sylvester turned again. That made 3. But the thug with the baton wasn't done. Back on his feet, he staggered forward, face red with rage and shame. He grabbed a pole and used it to hurl himself toward Sylvester, fists flailing now. No weapons, just fury. He screamed something incoherent and threw a punch. Sylvester ducked, rolled under the next, then landed a sharp elbow to the gut. The man gasped. Sylvester pressed forward, stepping in again, and drove his shoulder into the thug's chest. The impact lifted him off the floor and sent him crashing into the wall. The man collapsed like a sack of drenched rags, and this time, he didn't get back up. Beneath him, the subway vibrated with a deep, almost reverent rumble, as if it had borne witness to something older than the city itself. Sylvester Stallone remained still, bracing himself with one hand against the subway's grimy wall. His chest heaved steadily. A thin line of blood traced its way down from his brow, but his gaze stayed steady, unshaken. Around the car, passengers stirred, though not to retreat. They drew in closer. A young guy in a hoodie leaned to someone nearby and whispered, "He took out 4 of them." A woman near the sliding doors added in a low voice, "And he didn't lift a hand until he had no choice." Another voice followed. "He's not like the rest." Sylvester turned and made his way back to his wife. She hadn't moved, but her eyes shimmered with something unspoken. He bent down and retrieved the mangled tote bag from the floor. Only one apple remained. He offered it to her with quiet care. Her fingers trembled as they accepted it. Sylvester gave a faint nod, and for a few moments, the train car hung in a heavy, sacred silence. No one applauded. No one even breathed loud. But every soul there knew it. Something had shifted, and none of them would carry on quite the same. The train thundered onward under the concrete veins of the city. Its rhythm clattered on. But inside that car, stillness reigned. 3 men lay scattered across the floor, groaning. One had curled up by the doors. Another slumped over the edge of a bench. The third crouched beside a pole, cradling his side and muttering curses with no fire left in them. The fourth, still clutching the baton, remained motionless. Not unconscious, just beaten in a way that silences a man. At the center of it all stood Sylvester Stallone. His fists bore no trace of blood. His breath was steady. His lips had never spoken a threat. The brim of his old hat cast a soft shadow across his face. The streak of blood from temple to jaw had begun to dry, a quiet testament to the fact that even the strongest can bleed and still rise. He looked toward his wife. She hadn't said a word since he gave her the apple, but her hand no longer trembled. Now she stepped closer, just enough to close the distance between them, and reached for his arm. He allowed her to take it, without drama or pride. No show, no ovation. Just a woman anchoring herself beside the man who'd never let her fall. The rest of the passengers kept still. A teenage boy near the emergency exit slowly lowered his phone, as if realizing this wasn't something meant to be filmed. It was something to remember. Across from them, a man in a tailored jacket pulled his Bluetooth earpiece from his ear and just held it. A mother drew her daughter into her arms, eyes glossy with unshed tears. She said nothing. In one corner, one of the earlier attackers coughed and instantly regretted it. Sylvester didn't even turn his head. Instead, he stooped to gather the torn canvas bag once more. It was ragged now, but it held. He brushed it off with a quiet tenderness and slung it over his shoulder. His wife placed her hand lightly on his back. Overhead, the lights flickered. The subway car curved into another bend, and in that moment, it was only them. 2 figures standing firm in the heart of a storm they never sought but refused to run from. No one dared shift. No one dared speak. The man who had broken the chaos was no longer separate from it. He had become part of its silence. An elderly man seated in the far corner whispered something under his breath. No one quite caught the words, but his eyes shimmered and his lips mouthed 2 simple words. The train began to slow, the shriek of steel on steel echoing like a memory through the tunnel as the overhead voice announced the approaching stop. Lexington and 63rd. Still, no one moved. Sylvester remained at the center of the car. The dried blood framed his face beneath the tilt of his worn hat. His wife held his arm with care, her head leaning gently below his shoulder. Together, they braced for the stop ahead, not as something remarkable, but as if it were just another pause in the quiet rhythm of their day. But there was nothing ordinary about any of it anymore. Near the emergency exit, a young boy, no older than 12 or 13, tugged gently at his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "was that Sylvester Stallone?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes were fixed on the man, how calm his breathing remained, how he handed back a torn grocery bag to his wife like it still held worth, how his hands had never lifted in threat, yet never once seemed weak. After a moment, she gave the faintest nod. The boy's eyes widened. He said nothing more. Just a few seats over, a man wrapped in a gray scarf leaned close to the woman beside him and muttered, "I swear that was Stallone." She didn't reply. Her hand only tightened around her purse. Across the aisle, someone murmured, "Did you see how he moved? I've never seen anything like it, not in person." At the far end of the subway car, the man who had shoved Stallone's wife and dropped her groceries now lay slumped against the door, cradling his dislocated arm. His expression had shifted from sneering arrogance to stunned confusion. No more smug words. No more pretending he knew how this would play out. Because now, at last, he understood whose rules had governed this moment. Stallone didn't spare him a glance. He didn't look at anyone. His gaze remained on the door ahead, waiting for it to open, ready to step off the train exactly as he had stepped on, quiet, unnoticed, and unforgettable. The brakes hissed as the train came to a halt. The doors creaked, and pale morning light spilled onto the platform. Stallone turned toward his wife. "You ready?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded. He placed a steady hand at the small of her back and guided her forward. They walked together, moving past the crowd. No one blocked them. No one spoke. The people parted, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, a quiet respect. As the pair exited the train, a man near the front leaned slightly forward, still holding up his phone, recording in stunned silence. He didn't zoom. He didn't call out. He simply whispered to himself, "That was Sylvester Stallone." And even though Stallone never turned around, every single person on that train knew they would carry this moment with them when he stood, bled, and stayed standing. The platform wasn't silent the way the train had been. It was hushed, like the whole city had paused to catch its breath before exhaling. Stallone and his wife stepped off, their boots and loafers landing softly on the textured yellow strip along the platform's edge. The doors behind them gave one last hiss before closing. The train hadn't moved. Neither had anyone inside. It was as though the train itself waited, giving them space to vanish from view. Stallone didn't hurry. He never did. With his hand still gently at his wife's back, they made their way down the platform, passing one tiled pillar, then another. She glanced up at him. He met her eyes. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. A look passed between them, familiar and quiet. That had always been enough. Behind them, the train doors thudded shut. Inside, passengers remained frozen, phones raised, mouths slightly open, trying to absorb what they'd just witnessed. The four men still sprawled on the floor didn't move. None of them dared to follow. Stallone guided his wife toward the stairs. She walked a bit more slowly than usual, shaken, but steady. He stayed beside her, matching her pace without hurrying her along, step by step together. By the time they reached street level, the sounds of the city resumed. Car horns, bits of conversation, the flurry of pigeons chasing crumbs. Sunlight filtered through the grimy grate, washing over the concrete landing. Stallone tilted his cap lower as they emerged. No one up there knew what had just occurred below. No one recognized him. No one asked anything, and he gave no explanations. Across the street, a bus rolled to a stop. A cyclist zipped past. A woman laughed too loudly into her phone. Life moved on, unaware that something had just shifted in the silence below, that a boundary had been drawn. and then crossed. He and his wife crossed the street slowly. Stallone reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled shopping list she'd scribbled down earlier that morning. It had been folded and refolded, now creased and smudged. One edge was streaked faintly red where his hand had brushed it. He looked at it like it held scripture. "Still want those apples?" he asked. She gave him a faint smile. "Only if they're ripe." "They always are." They turned the corner. There would be no headlines, no medals. No viral clip could ever do justice to the weight of what had just happened. But for the people in that train car, for the boy clinging to his mother, for the woman clutching her purse, for the men who once thought power was something loud, it would never again be just another ride to work. It would be the day they watched a man bleed without faltering, protect without raising his voice, stand tall without needing anyone's help. Stallone opened the door to the little grocery store on the corner and held it open for his wife. A small chime rang out as they stepped inside, and behind them, the sidewalk swallowed their steps like it would for any other couple on any other morning, just another stop along the way. Thank you for joining me on this journey, one where every silent moment and every quiet courage speaks louder than 1,000 words. I hope you found the experience as moving and unforgettable as I did. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story touched you, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Until next time, take care and keep embracing those moments that truly define us.